Hey everyone, I'm Chris, horror filmmaker and fanatic, here to explain how scary media is. Today I'm going over Stranger Things, starting with Season 1 released in 2016. After the sudden vanishing of a young boy named Will Byers, the people of small-town Hawkins, Indiana begin to uncover secrets of a government lab, portals to another world, and sinister monsters. The boy's mother, Joyce Byers, who's convinced her son is still out there and in grave danger, desperately tries to find him, while the police chief Hopper searches for answers. Trying to help find Will, his friends, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas, discover a strange little girl who possesses telekinetic abilities. With a Rotten Tomatoes score of 97% and an audience score of 96%, this show received universal acclaim. It's a Netflix joint, so we don't know the budget or box office numbers or anything like that, but it's safe to say this show was a huge hit because everyone and their mother knows about Stranger Things. If you're new to this channel or wondering how I'm gonna cover a TV show because I've never done that before, the way that I break down how scary something is I separate the fear into 4 different categories because everyone finds different things scary, right? Well, this way you'll know if this thing, this media, movie, TV show, whatever, is scary enough for you. But because this is a TV show, I can't just pick a single number to rank each of the categories because different episodes have different ratings. So instead, I will have a gradient to show the highs and lows of the season in those specific categories, which makes sense because usually thrills are probably going to be higher at the later end of the season than early on. Now on this channel, I cover all kinds of horror, even to the really extreme stuff. So while the categories may end up looking low, I will explain in subjective detail what something is scary and how scary it actually is, because this is a family-friendly show overall, so I will try and break it down as fair as possible. Now, if you don't want spoilers, I highly suggest skipping to this time code where I give a non-spoiler overview of all the categories and then my recommendations for different viewership. But if you don't care about spoilers, then keep watching so you can find out how scary is Stranger Things Season 1. First category, the thrills, the intense, heart-pounding, racing, scary moments of any kind of horror media. Stranger Things is a thrilling show overall. I would say that the thrills are not necessarily horror-based. This is an overall family-friendly show, so it's not going to actually be in-your-face terrifying necessarily. But I will give props to Stranger Things Season 1. I do think there are some moments that are genuinely scary in the thrills category. Joyce's entire storyline in her paranoia-filled search for her son is definitely very spooky and scary. I especially love the use of the Clash song playing in Jonathan's room, and it sort of becomes this weird haunting message where it's like, uh-oh, is a monster coming near me or not? And Joyce has to decide to go back into the house. I always found all of those scenes scary. And of course, you know, the Demogorgon, everything with the Upside Down is spooky and creepy. But definitely the Demogorgon just showing up and doing terrible things is thrilling as well. And of course, everything in the final 2 episodes, the showdowns, all of that is very thrilling. Other thrills that aren't necessarily scary, but you know, I still like the scenes. 11, pranking the bullies, especially when they were about to cut Dustin and telling Mike to jump off the cliff. That was kind of crazy. Also 11, flipping that truck over was really cool. And actually, something that was pretty twisted that was thrilling as well. In the finale, when 11 bursts brains and kills a group of people, that was pretty hardcore. I really liked that. That was definitely like a thrilling, scary moment. But I think Season 1 has a really great energy and pacing to it. Just right away, beginning with one of the scariest scenes, which is Will Byers' disappearance, and never really letting off the pedal. You know, it just keeps going with the pacing and pushing. Everyone's pushing forward to try and find Will, and I really like that. So while the thrills aren't necessarily scary thrills, I would still say that most people are watching the show have their heart pumping every now and then, but it's kind of more towards the actual, like, you know, thriller, like fun, sort of adventurous thrills than necessarily scary thrills. So that's sort of where I will leave it at that. Next category, the grossness, all the disgusting, icky, gruey stuff that your mom doesn't want to look at. Stranger Things has actually a little bit of gross stuff to it every now and then. I mean, of course, you know, everything with the Upside Down, all the Demogorgon, all of that stuff is kind of gross and icky. You know, the portal, especially Barb's dead body, the slug coming out of her mouth, that's kind of gross. And then Will, when they find him at the end, he's all kind of gross and they have to pull that thing out of his mouth and then he ends up throwing it up later on. But you know, there's some little icky gross stuff every now and then, but in terms of like blood and gore or stuff like that, nah, not really. You do have the brains exploding, but it's done in a more tame way. It's just a little bit of blood coming out of their eyes. Yeah, really, the show, not very gross. I just will give a little bit of points because just maybe a little bit. Next up, shock value. This is the disturbing content that you didn't expect this show to show you. It's a family-ish show, so shock value is going to be low. That rhymed, I'm a rapper. But pretty much, yeah, the shock value, this is a relatively safe show for most people to watch. I will give points with the shock value too. That scene with 11 bursting those brains, that was hardcore. That was really cool. And also, Mike having to jump off the cliff. I think a lot of the kid danger that they're put in feels very palpable. I feel like, you know, you have main characters that are going to be 11-year-olds, so it's like, all right, I'm not expecting these kids to die. If they actually died horribly, then, oh, shock value, boom, to the roof, you know? But none of that happens. However, sometimes they are put in situations that feel legitimately dangerous, and some shocking moments kind of happen. Early on, I actually really found Benny's death, the diner owner. His sudden death out of nowhere really got me. I was kind of surprised about that. I was like, oh, I actually really liked him, and now he's just dead. Dang, okay. I also found Jonathan Byers taking kind of creepy photos of Nancy and her friends. That was also like a little shocking, because up until that point, Jonathan Byers was sort of shown as a sympathetic, positive character. You know, he's a good brother and also trying to help his crazy mom, but then he kind of slips up and he does something that isn't very good and taking creepy photos, and I was a little surprised by that. I was like, oh, okay, got some complexity to this character. Yeah, those are pretty much all the shocking things that I can think of, but again, in the grand scheme of horror, this is not very shocking at all, but I will give points, you know, for a safe show. There's some stuff in here that is a little challenging. Final category, atmosphere. The overall tone and feeling of the show. How scary is it really building up those fears? This show is mild to moderate at the end of the day. That's what I would say, because it's not a horror show. It's a sci-fi adventure drama comedy with horror elements. But for this season, the horror elements are actually kind of scary at times. I think the scares are definitely at their best early on in the season. I think the overall creepy atmosphere of Will's disappearance and the mystery plot uncovering the conspiracy of the lab and, you know, this upside down, like all of the creepy, weird, other dimensional stuff is genuinely well done in the atmosphere department early on. It's once you start learning about it, the show kind of steers a little bit away from the horror category, which makes sense because in the end, the characters are going to overcome the fear and learn about it, so the horror is going to subside. And of course, this show is multiple genres, so there's plenty of scenes that aren't scary whatsoever and are not meant to be scary, but I think the show throughout this first season definitely keeps an overall tone that is kind of a little unsettling at times, but in sort of a safe way. And what also helps with the spooky atmosphere is the kids genuinely feel like they're in danger at times, and even though I don't believe that anything terrible will happen to them, the show kind of still gets me caught up in it a bit, where I'm like, ooh, okay, I hope they make it out of this situation. I'm not sitting back thinking, I just know they're gonna get out of this, whatever, this isn't real, you know, like there's some tension in there, so I will give points to the atmosphere. Moving on to the non-spoiler overview of Stranger Things Season 1. So as you can see, the show is safe in the shock value and grossness department. It's pretty low. You know, everything with the other dimension and stuff, that's sort of where the grossness comes into play. There's no real, like, blood or gore or anything, you know, R-rated that's actually gross or anything. So that's fine. Shock value, there's a couple things in there that are actually maybe a little bit surprising for sort of a safer show. But really, you're not going to see anything that's going to completely horrify you. And then the thrills are not really scary thrills. More of it is kind of just thrilling, sort of fun adventure. But there is some genuine scary scenes, genuine like horror scenes, especially early on in the season. I think they built up the fear very well, and I would say there's probably a handful of scenes that are genuinely scary. And then finally, atmosphere. The atmosphere definitely ebbs and flows throughout the season. It is multiple genres, so it's not always focused on horror. In fact, most of the time it's focused on sort of just fun discovery, adventure, and mystery plot uncovering. But the atmosphere does keep a good tone throughout of just things are a little on edge, and there's this tension building and this weird mystery that's kind of creepy and spooky. That's how I would describe this overall season. On to my recommendations. Stranger Things is a really good show. Season 1, it holds up very well. It is not scary necessarily. There are spooky scenes and maybe a couple moments that are genuinely unsettling, but for the most part, it is family friendly, and pretty much most people can watch it without getting overly scared. I think if you're a horror newbie, this would actually be a really good way to sort of give yourself a taste test. If you're watching some of these scenes and you're finding yourself really scared, then, you know, maybe build up till you start watching Saw or any of those other hardcore horror movies. But if you're genuinely enjoying enjoying a lot of the spooky scenes, then maybe it's time to start checking out other horror stuff and really diving into that genre. And finally, because people look this up a lot and this show isn't fully horror, I'm sure there are parents in the audience who are wondering if this show is safe for their kid to watch. I think it is very safe for most kids to watch. The main characters are 11 years old, so if your kid is around that age, they're gonna love the show and they're gonna really relate to the characters. If your kid's a little younger, maybe like 7 or 8 years old, maybe some scenes could be a little challenging. Definitely watch it with them, and no matter what, just always stay with them and communicate with them and really just pay attention if your child is actually struggling with watching the show. And anything below that, maybe not. The show might just kind of fly over their head possibly. That's up to your discretion. I would recommend though that the first scene of the first episode is a really good taste test of the horror because it's a scary scene. So if you watch that scene on your own, you can kind of decide if the show would be right for your child or if they would find it too scary. And that is how scary Stranger Things Season 1 is. I will be going over Seasons 2, 3, and 4, so be sure to check those out in the coming days. Post a comment down below of what you would like me to go over. Clearly, I will go over TV shows, and I will also be covering video games in the future, so post a comment of any video games you would like me to go over. Subscribe for more, and thank you very much for watching. Bye.